Back in 1991, the entire world was glued to their TVs, watching the Gulf War unfold live. We saw these incredible images of smart bombs hitting their targets with surgical precision. We heard from generals in these super sterile press briefings, and it all felt like this clean, swift, decisive victory. But what if I told you that according to one of the most provocative thinkers of the 20th century, the event we all witnessed wasn't actually a war at all? That in a very real way, it never even happened. Yeah, let's get into that.
This right here is the book that kicked the whole thing off. In 1991, the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard published a series of essays with this, you got to admit, incredibly provocative title. Now, Baudrillard wasn't a historian. He wasn't a military analyst. He was a thinker who was absolutely obsessed with images, with media, and with this strange, simulated reality he saw them creating all around us. And for him, the Gulf War wasn't just another conflict. Oh no, it was the ultimate proof of his entire theory.
And there it is, the central claim in all its glory. Now let's be perfectly clear. Baudrillard was not denying that violence occurred. He knew bombs were dropped, soldiers were sent over, and that people tragically died. His point was way more subtle and honestly a lot more disturbing. He was arguing that the event we perceived as the Gulf War, the thing we watched on our screens, was not a war in any traditional sense of the word. It was something totally new, a meticulously crafted media spectacle, a simulation.
So, to unpack all of this, we're first going to look at the war as it was shown to us on TV. Then, we'll dive into his core concept of the hyper-real to really understand why this all matters so much. From there, we'll see how this redefines the whole thing as a non-war, and finally, we'll talk about what it means for us living in the simulation today.
Okay, so let's start with what everyone saw. I mean, for the very first time, a war was being broadcast live, 24/7. But what exactly were we watching?
You see, the military planners in 1991 had learned a massive lesson from Vietnam. Uncontrolled images can lose you a war. The raw, often brutal footage coming out of Southeast Asia had completely turned public opinion against the conflict. So for the Gulf War, they took a radically different approach, one they'd already tested out in places like the Falklands. They put in place this unprecedented level of military control over journalists, a new kind of censorship, all to make sure the war was presented in a very specific, carefully managed way.
So what did that managed presentation actually look like? Well, it gave us the world's first virtual war. The story we were all told was dominated by images that made the conflict feel clean, surgical, almost like a video game. We saw these endless loops of footage from the nose cams of smart bombs, which was really more a celebration of the technology itself. But the real story was about what we didn't see. Almost no human casualties, and absolutely zero from the Allied side. It was a war completely sanitized for our consumption. And this was happening right as CNN was taking over the world. Its 24/7 coverage was a game changer. It wasn't just reporting on the war, you could argue it became the stage for the war. This constant, looping broadcast created what Baudrillard called instant history. A single, powerful story, built from just a handful of selected images that was immediately beamed across the globe and accepted as the final, definitive truth.
This quote, it just perfectly captures this circular absurdity of the whole thing. The media event had become completely self-referential. You had reporters on the ground who were supposed to be our eyes and ears, and they weren't reporting on the reality in front of them. Nope. They were reporting on the media's version of reality that they were watching on TV, just like the rest of us. This is exactly what Baudrillard meant when he famously said the map had become the territory. The representation had totally replaced the real thing.
So, if the war on TV wasn't the real war, then what in the world was it? Well, to get Baudrillard's answer, we need to bring in two of his most famous and maybe infamous ideas, the simulacrum and hyperreality.
First up, the simulacrum. Now, this isn't just a copy of something real. Think of it more like a copy of a copy, where the original has been completely lost. For Baudrillard, the televised Gulf War was the perfect simulacrum. It wasn't a representation of the war, it was a virtual spectacle that straight up replaced the real war. It was a substitute designed to serve a very specific strategic purpose.
And when that simulacrum becomes totally convincing, we enter a state he called hyperreality. This is when the simulations start to feel more real than reality itself. The lines don't just get blurry, they completely disappear. The virtual media war and the actual conflict on the ground fuse together into this weird new third thing, making it basically impossible to tell one from the other.
And this quote just nails the shift. Baudrillard is saying that that televised spectacle, wasn't just reporting on the war, it was actively deterring the real war from ever showing up. That clean electronic image on our screens was there to obscure, to replace, and ultimately to prevent us from having to confront the messy, ugly, violent reality on the ground.
Okay, so with these ideas in our heads, we can finally get to the heart of what Baudrillard meant when he made that crazy claim that the Gulf War did not take place. Think about war in the classic sense, the way the theorist Clausewitz defined it. It's a real confrontation, a duel between two sides. Politics by other means, right? But when Baudrillard looked at the Gulf conflict, he saw something completely different. He saw a totally one-sided, almost pre-programmed operation, where the technological gap was so huge that a real fight was impossible. He brilliantly flipped Clausewitz, calling it not politics pursued by other means, but the absence of politics pursued by other means.
So this is the crucial point to get. He wasn't denying that an event happened. He was challenging our very definition of what we should call that event. He argued that the word war, with all the historical weight and meaning it carries, simply didn't apply anymore to this new kind of hyperreal, one-sided, televised conflict.
And let's remember, this was no small operation. We're talking about 500,000 American soldiers deployed over there. The physical reality of the mobilization was absolutely immense, which only makes its almost total disappearance from our TV screens even more significant.
And to really hammer home the bizarre nature of this non-war, Baudrillard points to a statistic that is just surreal. Over the 7 months of the deployment, an American soldier was 3 times more likely to die in a road accident in the Gulf than they would have been back home in civilian life. Just let that sink in for a second. It's a fact so absurd, it forces you to stop and ask, what kind of war was this really?
Now, this wasn't just some academic argument about a single conflict. Baudrillard saw the Gulf War as a terrifying blueprint for the future, a sign of the world we were all about to enter.
So what's the big takeaway here? First, the Gulf War was a massive turning point. It was the first truly virtual war. Second, the media didn't just report on it, they, along with the military, created a clean, technological simulation of it. And that simulation became so powerful, it became hyper-real, replacing the messy truth in all of our minds. Which leads to Baudrillard's most chilling point. The real victory wasn't military. It belonged to the simulators, the ones who controlled the images. And the ultimate weapon wasn't a bomb. It was information itself, used not to enlighten us, but to deceive and create this kind of passive agreement.
And all of this leaves us with a question that's more urgent today than it ever was, in our age of social media feeds and endless 24/7 news cycles. When we watch a conflict, a crisis, or any major event unfold from behind our screens, are we actually bearing witness to reality? Or have we just become the captive audience for a very convincing and very dangerous simulation?